All right. So, Monty, it's really great to have you here. Monty's my guest. This is not an official show, but we decided after speaking to each other yesterday, we had such a great conversation. I figured, why don't we just do this all over again? We'll get a captive audience, and we're going to talk about everything and anything controversial. We're going to make it as interesting and controversial without naming names. All right.
Yeah, the good
About
idea.
right about what's going on here. And let me just, for those of you who don't know Monty too well, I mean, I'm sure you've seen him on Facebook. He has very insightful and profoundly written posts. Monty was born in Brooklyn, New York. He studied comparative religion. He became interested in astrology back in the mid 70s. When he met his future wife and artistic collaborator, Amy Zerner, who I believe might pop in. And Monty's desire is really to make astrology understandable and accessible to the broad audience. That's what was one of the driving forces that got him to write his books and devise his card sets and unique kits that made other esoteric systems accessible during the 1980s into the 1990s, where he made his biggest landmark, especially with his over the 2 million copies of his 40 books in divination systems and meditations and DVDs and CDs that have been published in 14 languages around the world. So Monty has been doing this shortly. I mean, you go all the way back really to the late 60s in terms of your initiation into this during the whole entire counterculture revolution, right?
Yeah. Well, when I met Amy in 1974, she was studying astrology and I was studying Amy, so I learned astrology.
Cool.
Because prior to that, I thought it was all a bunch of nonsense. And then I realized there's a lot to it because, like we were talking yesterday, as the great Sir Thomas Huxley, grandfather of Aldous Huxley, said, "I'm too much a skeptic not to believe that anything's possible."
Absolutely. You know, I have the same approach about everything, right?
I can tell. I mean, the minute I saw your work, I knew I had a kindred spirit in front of me.
Right. And we're both Long Islanders, right? So
yeah, Brooklyn, Long Island, same thing.
Yeah, right. I was born in Queens, and then my parents moved out in the 70s to Long Island, early 70s. So, you know, and I was working up in Port Jefferson, right?
Yeah.
Crystal Rainbow, remember that?
I think I do.
Yeah, that's where I got initiated into doing astrology, as you know. So yeah, so we go way back. I'm more of a product of the late 80s, early 90s. There was a second, so we had the initial boom, late 60s, early 70s, which you were a part of. And then there was a secondary new age boom, if you will, that occurred in the late 80s, especially when Ronald Reagan's astrologer, Joan Quigley, came out with her book.
Right.
And that galvanized a new interest in astrology and metaphysics, and metaphysical stories in conservative Republican Long Island started popping up everywhere. And that's where I got my opportunity.
Well, that's how karma cards happened, is people were generally interested in it a little bit. And then when it came out in 1988, it was the same time that Nancy Reagan was discovered to have used what Joan Quigley said as an astrologer.
Right.
And the first printing went from 15,000 with Penguin Books to 45,000. And it's been printed ever since.
Right. And you have your divination kit, which was way ahead of its time. And I picked up that kit back in Crystal Rainbows back in the day. This was in the 90s. Really? Yeah, I still have it. I still have it. Yes. And I have used it. You know, it was like I was in that, you know, when you first learn about divination and horror, it's like a love affair. So you buy everything and anything that somewhat connected, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, so you were just way ahead of your time. I mean, it's just amazing what you did. And a lot of people out there, for those of you who are practicing astrologers or serious students, or just people who are just interested in what astrology or metaphysics can offer, many people don't know about Monte's contribution. You've been sort of like your own standalone right? You've been operating sort of outside the periphery of the mainstream astrological organizations
Oh
and
yeah.
speakers. And
Yeah.
one thing about Monte I have to say is he's also, you know, he's a successful businessman, a
Yes.
successful writer, musician. He's worked in Hollywood as a cameraman. He's worked in the entertainment industry. So you, unlike many astrologers, have been successful in the secular world, the hardcore secular world, and felt called to go into astrology
Yes.
and build a business and monetize that as well.
And it all came out of spirituality, because before I got into astrology, I had read, autobiography of a yogi, and gotten into self-realization fellowship, and
Right.
meditated and did Kriya yoga and all that other stuff. And there was a martial arts component to it. And martial arts, if you really get into it, it's a very spiritual thing. There's a lot of meditation involved, zazen, sitting, and stretching and all that other stuff. And that's where I came to astrology from, is from a spiritual background. I used to play music in Sri Chinmoy's restaurant in Queens. Speaking of Queens, you know, he had Anand Brahma. I think it might even still be there. And John McLaughlin would play there sometimes, the great guitarist, and Carlos Santana, who was also a disciple of Sri Chinmoy. I was never a disciple. I'm never a joiner, and that's why I was never a joiner of the various astrological organizations, because they were a little dry for me and a little set in their ways, kind of. And what I had done, they thought, I guess, was a game.
Well, you know what? You wouldn't fit into their club because you were successful.
Yes.
No, I'm being honest here.
I love
think
it.
I could say that now as someone who's been a member of these organizations for over 30 years, and knowing how most of the astrologers professionally over that 30-year period make their money. And 90% of them, and I don't know if you know this, Monty, 90% of them, and I happen to know in detail how majority of them make their money, is not through astrology. They're subsidized by a rich spouse, a trust fund, settlement, you name it. They live with their parents. They, you name it. All right. It has nothing to do with the income they derive from astrology. And yet they're the biggest speakers, lecturers, writers, pontificators, and Facebook critics, and that dismiss other astrologers who are up and coming, and especially those who are talented and have been successful in the outside world. I can say this now with authority. I could say this now with confidence, and I can say this with riveting detail without naming names. So that's part of the reason I think you never fit in.
Well, I don't. I was lucky enough to study with some great people, especially Leor Warner, who's unfortunately not alive.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, he used to tell me, you know, you could do this, you could do this, you can do readings for people. And then when I started, he encouraged me until he was encouraging me to charge more than he was charging me. And when I started doing readings for him, it's like when I started doing psychic readings for other psychics, I realized that I was getting better at it. But I've always enjoyed the business aspect of life. And I did enjoy working in the film business. I like people. I think that's what you can tell from your work as well. You are actually trying to help people. And like in the book of Tao, it says one who would lead must follow all. Like a herd of deer, the big tough deer walks backward as at the back, because he's going to defend everybody from attacks from the back, because that's where the attacks come from.
Exactly.
But like I said, I can tell from your work as well, at the heart of it is a very spiritual attitude towards life and trying to help people.
Yeah, well, you know, that's been my driving force. I mean, initially get into that for that reason. I got really caught up with what you could do with astrology in terms of giving you the edge. I was very much into the edge. I was very much into, and still am into, the Anthony Robbins approach of
Walking on fire.
Walking on fire, optimal performance technologies, as it was called back in the day. And so I've integrated that approach with my astrology, and it has become more spiritual as I've gone deeper and further into it. Although, as you know, I'm both very much in a secular world with the financial and geopolitical, and also, as you know, with the very spiritual in terms of my approach to astrological magic.
Well, there's that, and then the remote viewing you were talking about yesterday. Yeah, and one of the reasons I think that you're so good at this is you're multidisciplinary and you can do a lot of things well. Because if you can just do one thing, I mean, that's great, it's wonderful. But when you can see various aspects of life and relate this to that, because astrology, to really be a good astrologer, you have to be able to put a lot of moving parts together as they're moving, and they keep moving.
Right.
So you got to know a lot of different things about, like I've done a lot of things, whether it's selling hot dogs at Coney Island when I was 16, or jumping up and down on garbage cans, and being a bodyguard in the movie business, and a location person. And it all comes down to respecting everyone who works, because everybody is all in the same boat. And astrology, like you say, gives you the edge.
It gives you the edge. And so, because you did everything under the sun to make a living, you took all of that and you used it as unconsciously, you took all of that and leveraged with that in terms of building and monetizing your business.
Yes.
As an astrologer, as someone who does divination, as someone who's achieved quite a bit. I mean, you reached an uncanny 80% accuracy back in 2008, which was actually documented by Lifetime. Am I correct on that? Yeah.
Lifetime, and then also on the street, until Jim Cramer realized he had a psychic that kept being interviewed on the street.com.
Yeah. So
wonderful woman named Alex Steele, and she came originally to interview Amy and I, because my wife is a fashion designer at Bergdorf for 20 years. And so she came, and you have an interesting business. It's all about business. And at the end, they asked me 8 questions. Price of gold, price of oil, who's going to win the election. That's the only one I was wrong about. And I think I got 7 out of 8. And
who did you pick for the election back then? I'm just curious. Who did you pick?
I think I picked Romney, but at the time, I was wrong, obviously.
Right. Hey, by the way, we were both wrong. I picked Romney too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I have a pretty good track record up until that point.
Well, maybe he did something that screwed the whole thing up, because you can change the future.
Absolutely. The future is a lot more fluid, as we know, doing a lot of, not only in divination is that clear, although with horror, it has a more fixed, the symbolism is a little bit more fixed, but it does have testimonies of fluidity, right? Where things can reverse.
You know how, I was just going to say that Zechariah Sitchin, who could read Sumerian, told me that the Sumerians said that there was a difference between fate and destiny.
Correct.
That fate was like the human thing that could be changed, but a destiny was like the planetary motions, which had been changed. They understood that the planets had been affected when that planet Nibiru first came through and made different planets like Uranus go on its side and all this other stuff.
Right.
They knew that it could happen, but it happens like every 4 billion years ago. So a destiny to them was something that could be changed, but not really,
So, yeah, I mean, I have slightly different definitions, but from what they're just words here. I think people are ultimately looking for what their path is, their life path, their destiny path based on their soul's code, and calling the prime directives or soul contract, if you will, that they agreed to prior to this life. And one of the things about astrology, as we know, is it can clearly articulate that. And there's multiple directives, multiple purposes, multiple things that need to be achieved, learned, integrated, not only in terms of challenges, but also accomplishments, things that need to be achieved in life for particular outcomes and developments that will occur. So we have a destiny that we need to fulfill, and we're either on track to fulfilling it or off track, or we're either track and on track, or going off track or completely off track. So, I mean, this is what I see going on. This is the most profound thing that I profusely in my work late, that the people that call me know, not everybody, but most of the people that call me know they're profound off track. And not only so that they know they're off track, but they don't know where they got off track, and they need to know how to get back on track with their destiny path.
Right. That's powerful stuff. Well, I- they say in Raja Yoga, we pray to the Almighty when we get stuck. And I always used to think of it as we get stuck with a spear, but it's actually,
Right.
I think it's when people are stuck and they can't move their feet. They don't know which way to go. And as they say in Chinese, I know you're not supposed to talk about China now, but this is not, it's not the
How dare
Communist
you? That's
Party.
racist. That's racist.
No,
Go on.
you know, everyone knows this expression, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, but that's actually a mistranslation. It's the journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath your feet.
That's right.
And so when you have your chart done by someone who knows what they're doing, it helps you decide how that first step is going to be taken, but you got to do the planning. Like in the tarot, that's the two of wands, the cross.
Absolutely.
You're at the crossroads. And yes, it's unfortunate, but when people come to you for a chart, I don't know if you have this too, but when I was doing readings, I'm sort of trying to wind down on doing readings.
Mm-hmm.
They would come to me and say, is this going to work out, all the things that I've done? I was like, why don't you come to me beforehand? You know,
that's exactly what's happening right now.
Yes, it's crazy. You know, I had somebody who was asking me all kinds of ridiculous questions, and then they lost millions from Bernie Madoff. And I said, well, why didn't you ask me about investing with Bernie Madoff before you did it? He said, I thought it was a sure thing.
Right.
What are you supposed to say to that?
Right. Now they want you to come in and rescue it, give them all the quick fixes. Right.
And I'm not an auto mechanic.
Right.
My friends used to call me the celestial mechanic, but you still, at a certain point, you can't.
I know.
You can't fix those things. You know, come to me or come to you, please. Before you do stuff,
before you make a big investment, a big decision, before you marry someone, before you decide to sign out mortgage contract. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't come afterwards. I once asked Amy, my wife Amy Zerner, if what's the common denominator of all human caused suffering, which will give you an idea of the human suffering she goes through being married to me. And she said, without a moment's hesitation, she said, poor decision making.
Decision making.
And that's really the human caused suffering. I'm not talking about natural disasters or anything like that. But if you make some good decisions beforehand and listen to someone like you who've been warning about this time for years, like 8 years, right? You've been talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I've really sort of focused in intensely since 2018 and saying that we were on the verge of an X event. And we'll get to that later, but we were on the verge of a dramatic event that would shift and change the course of history, that would define or be a defining moment in everyone's life on the planet who was alive at that time.
Well, you could not be more right. I mean,
you're one of your astrologers to recognize that. You know for a fact, and we've talked about this yesterday, that the non-astrologers have finally said, hey, you were right, William. I'm not going to question you from this point on. But a majority of the astrological community, especially its leadership, continues to send me emails and Facebook messages. It's just the flu, bro. William, you're overhyping this. You're making astrology and astrologers look bad.
That's great.
This is a hoax. This is all Trump trying to this is Trump trying to pull a military. And these are the keynote speakers, folks.
Terrible.
All right, Montino. All right, I'm telling you. I mean, this is what I've been getting.
Now this makes me even more glad that I have never stuck my head out so that they don't know and they wouldn't think to write to me and call me, because they could not be more. It's like going around the world. You reach a point where you're coming back. They're that wrong. They're 180 degrees incorrect. All you have to do is see the people that have gotten this disease, some people with no pre-existing conditions, their lungs are like glass. I mean, to say that you've been wrong, you've been 100% correct.
Right. And they happen to think that there's they ignore what's happening with the markets. That doesn't even, exactly. Sorry. I say, listen, so if I play into their argument and say, okay, let's say it's a hoax. let's say it's a massive intelligence operation on a global scale by the American deep state. Okay.
Oh,
Let's play into that. Explain to me why they would begin the debt destruction that would actually not only imperil the 99%, but the 1%. The 1%
yes.
are worried now. Why would they do that?
Well, the 1% live out where I live, and they live behind big walls, even though they say that we shouldn't have walls. And they have lots of guns around them, even though they don't want people to have guns. And they know that with an X event like you're talking about riots in the streets. You're talking, and ever since the French Revolution and before, actually, that is what all governments fear more than anything else, is the people realizing, hey, who are these idiots? What are they doing? And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if there's one thing I can tell about things astrologically and knowing the various people's charts involved, this is not that. This is exactly what it appears to be. It appears to be people trying their best to save the country and to save the economy. But unfortunately, a lot of stuff about the economy was baked into the cake before this happened.
Correct. And that's been something I've been articulating in my webinars, in my global webinars since 2014.
Yeah, exactly.
Because look, what happened is the great Obama, who I happen to vote for the first time, I voted for him. I'll admit it. My wife and I raised some money for him, right? Back in the day, we were naive. We didn't know any better, but okay. So that happened. What happened is that he, along with Wall Street, it wasn't just him, but his administration was responsible for financializing the economy, where Wall Street became more important than Main Street. And then through snake oil salesman tactics, convinced the majority of the body politic and electorate that got him reelected that the economy has been healed, green shoots are here, things are better than ever, and the middle class is back growing and where they were at prior to 2007. And everybody out there knows, I asked the question, since 2008, are you better off now? During the whole time that Obama was in office, were you better off then than you were prior to 2007? And the majority of the people I asked that question to is they say, absolutely not. I'm not even close to where I was at in 2000.
We were barely coming out of it when this happened.
Right.
To me, I mean, that's how I see it. A lot of people with 401ks and all this stuff, investment, they saw their investments growing tremendously, but the underlying, it's as if someone did a very thin sheet of glass over a sewer.
It was the financialization of the economy, where it was no longer about production that generated returns. It was about stock buybacks, like Apple, for instance.
Yes.
Do you know that Apple actually sells less iPhones and less Macs and less everything than they did back in 2015? So since 2015, their sales continue to spiral down. Their stock continues to go up because back in 2008, they allowed the great Obama and the Fed and the wonderful, brilliant Timothy Geithner all allowed stock buybacks.
Yeah.
Where they could buy back their own stock
to keep the price from falling.
Borrow the money on 0% interest rates, right? Roll over that debt, borrow back more, buy stock, right? Which creates corporate debt, roll it over again, and keep doing that. And continuing the policy, the financialization policy of extending and pretending.
Yeah. Well, it's just like what Andy Warhol used to do. When he knew a piece of his was coming up for auction, he made sure there was somebody that went there, and if the price was too low, they bid for it, because he did not want the price of his art to go down. They wanted to keep their stock prices high, and I'm sure they were selling a bit of their personal stuff at the same time. That the stock buyback was probably mainly for them. Because character is destiny, and these people are just human beings. And unfortunately, and we've had this conversation yesterday too about the baby boomers. I've had to deal with the greedy baby boomers myself. And Amy, the same thing. The people, yes, we had people before Pluto and Leo. We had the Pluto in Cancer and Gemini. but they all wanted to suck up to the old school, and they all wanted to keep the old stuff going because that's how they were making their money. And so you had all these venal people doing these buybacks and abandoning Main Street in favor of Wall Street.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the real thing, I think the real criticism, and this is something that we talked about yesterday, that Theodore White addresses, is the fact that they gave up the very things that galvanized the period in which they came into power during the counterculture revolution.
I'm still waiting to come into power, but
well, you know, that was their moment when they started kicking it to the man, right? Right. And the GI generation, who fought and won World War II, established the post-1945, the postmodern world that we live in, and basically gave us this sense of middle class entitlement, right? So that counterculture revolution, where they were galvanizing a new approach to life, where there was some really much a kickback against that middle class, right? That middle class convention, right? So they abandoned that, right, by the late 70s and become extremely materialistic, extremely greedy.
Unfortunately, you're right.
Extremely aggressive in terms of, right, where greed is good. Greed is
just like
good.
Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street.
That's right. That's right. And that's what happened. And that's something that no one gives Theodore White credit for. They just say, oh, he's a baby boomer basher. Well, you know what? Maybe, you know, that's something, you know, before someone comes to that judgment, look at his argument. Look at his argument.
He's absolutely right. And unfortunately, I mean, I had the same reaction because you know, you don't want to get painted with the brush, but what can you do down or baby boomers? You're going to think baby boomers are no good. This is unfortunately the seat of racism and all this other stuff. If your experience reinforces a message, what are you supposed to do? Yes, there are exceptions. I'm egotistical, Pluto and Leo on the ascendant enough to think I'm an exception, but I don't blame someone who doesn't know me for thinking I'm just, you know, another one of the boomers who poops unicorns.
Right. Right. You know, I just think, I think what we're going to see, unfortunately, as things unfold, is the type of generation and class wars between, not just only between the have and have-nots, but also between the millennials and the boomers, those who are trying to come into power and those who are still holding on to power.
Yeah. Well, what can I say? I mean, I wish you were on the Voodoo show the other day. You were talking about some kind of a resurrection. I remember we were talking about this yesterday. I think that's a really, really important thing. The deep soul work you were talking about.
The collective psychospiritual death rebirth.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yeah, because that answers exactly what you were talking about. Because those that have ears, let them hear. The people that, you know, I was watching this video about a man talking about Rudolf Steiner, who had a lot of trouble with the government. Let me tell you, I think they put him in jail. The guy with the organ blankets and
of course, yes.
And
you're talking about Reich, Wilhelm Reich.
Oh, that's Wilhelm Reich. Okay, so no, but Steiner talked about. You're right. Oh, sorry, I'm a little confused. But Steiner was talking about how a virus is something that is secreted by a damaged toxic cell, and he analyzed things about the. There's been pandemics in 1917 when the Spanish flu
we have pandemics that go back to the time of Justinian around 517, 518 that took out 25% of the world population 100%. In 1 month. 1 month, 25% of the world population.
Right. No, 100%, and their hygiene, I'm sure, left much to be desired.
Wait, real quick, Saturn, Pluto.
Well, there you go. Saturn, Pluto. You know, the other day you posted about how some astrologers think that Pluto doesn't have anything to do with it. I think I might have spit my coffee out when I read it. because, as somebody with Pluto on my ascendant, I've sort of chosen to come into this life and understand Pluto a little bit. And Pluto's definitely got something about it. But so he talked about how the pandemics since the Spanish flu are involved with the rollout, like they were electrifying all the cities and the towns at that point. And every time they bring out another thing like radar, another thing like radio waves and cell phones, there's always some kind of pandemic. And he likened this to the one we have now, the COVID-19 Wuhan virus, Communist Chinese Party virus, whatever you want to call it. He likened this one is involved with 5G because Wuhan was the site of 5G, and so was Milan. Of course, so is New York, some of the first places. But what he said, and I was waiting for this guy to get to so what can we do about it? Because I think
but Monty, I have a question. What about, how do you justify the bubonic plague in 1348 and the Justinian plague back in the early 500s when there was no electricity?
I think it must be related to hygiene and living conditions and overpopulation. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying what this guy
I was just wondering what Steiner's approach or what he would say.
I hadn't, it wasn't involved in that YouTube video.
Okay.
But when he finally got to the what can you do about it, he said that the only thing to do is to make sure that you drink pure water and that you stay spiritually elevated. And that doesn't sound like enough, but
not with this bioweapon.
No,
well, that's whoa. Can't be a bioweapon, right? I'm sorry. Definitely. I take that back. I can't say Chinese bioweapon. Let me take that back. Okay.
Chinese Communist Party. Communist Party bioweapon.
Well, this is not going to get on YouTube, folks, unfortunately, because they will not allow it. If you say bioweapon, right?
Really?
Or yes, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Well, I can. You can.
We'll bleep it out. We'll bleep it out. Okay.
Yeah. So let's say it was Chinese sniffles. Can we call it the Chinese sniffles?
I don't know. You'll have to ask the Silicon Valley thought police.
Oh my God, they're so awful. Well, there's so much about that where it's related it's related to the two Chinese scientists being frog marched out by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police out of University of, I think, Manitoba.
Correct.
Because they had shipped samples to the Wuhan level 4 bio lab, and China didn't like the way they were packed and said something about it. And it triggered all kinds of stuff where those people got thrown out of their lab. And then you had the guy who ran the Harvard virology or something.
Correct. Up in Boston.
Yeah,
Yes.
And I think they might have actually arrested him and put him in jail.
He's been arrested. He has been arrested by the FBI.
And then there was the other guy before that must have ratted him out, was caught at Boston airport on his way to China with virulent samples. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
Right.
And people say, oh, conspiracy theories. Well, yeah. What are you supposed to say? If you think that there is not germ warfare research going on in these labs, I have a bridge I'd love to sell you.
Right. And, most people out there that are, if you present the evidence and you can source it out, most of them come to that conclusion at some point. At least many of the people on Facebook have come back and said, listen, I didn't believe in that bioweapon theory, but I looked into it after you sparked my interest or engaged my imagination, started deconstructing my skepticism, and I'm coming to that conclusion as well, where the astrological community is completely in massive cognitive dissonance on a scale that is mind-boggling about this as a possibility, along with the fact that we are in a long emergency.
You're kidding. It's just incredible to me. That must drive you nuts.
No, I mean, at first it did, but I just have to accept. Now, here's the good thing about that. That tells me we are much closer to the singularity X event. I call it kaboom, right? That pyramid that has the Uranus-Pluto square, Saturn-Pluto conjunction, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, And at the top of that pyramid, the annular solar eclipse at 0 degrees Cancer on the world point, all pointing up to this sort of like kaboom event as we're moving towards a singularity where collective cognitive dissonance, and this has been proven out by social scientists, if you go all the way back to the time of the sack of Rome, that within days to weeks leading up to an event that changed the course of history, that correlated with the start of a war or the beginning of a pandemic or the collapse of the financial markets, right? Based on the letters, based on the proclamations, based on the decisions that they could backtrack. Within days to weeks, there was proclamations, decisions that actually were completely counter to what the evidence was showing, right, at that time that led to the crisis. For example, back in 1939, they had a UAC conference. They didn't call it that, but all the top astrologers in the world attended in London, and the London Times and all the London press, right, the equivalent of CNN, was there, and they had this big meeting, and they all came out and said, our consensus is there will be no war. This was in late August 1939, okay? There will be no war. This was published in the papers. It was the greatest setback of astrology, probably only second to that Hillary Clinton would win by a landslide, which was also
that was a big one.
Right. When I saw a presidential panel of supposedly the world's best astrologers, those who have like 700 to 800 700 to 800 Patreon attendees, right, who pay for their YouTube channel, who pay for their Patreon, right? All right. We're talking about astrologers who have massive followings that all predicted a Hillary Clinton landslide within weeks of the election, just as the same as the panel of world-class astrologers that attended that conference in London. I don't remember the names at the moment, but I teach this in my mundane astrology course. It's in the third week of my classes, talking about collective cognitive dissonance actually increases. And so when the astrologers are writing me scathing emails and denying things on Facebook that this is a hoax and you're misleading people and you're just a Trumpster and we just know you're that's a whole nother ball of wax. But the point is what I know, we're actually getting closer when people start reacting, especially those who are informed, when we have establishment authorities, establishment astrologers, establishment Wall Street people. Like, watch the film The Big Short. Have you watched that film, The Big Short?
I have not, but I know what you're saying is true. I mean, I'm looking at the chart you have up now, and you see that Neptune and the Sun are in Pisces.
And what does Neptune rule?
Illusion.
But not only illusion, in terms of what's happening now.
Definitely idealization and the
epidemics.
Well,
epidemics.
That too. Sure,
epidemics.
It's anything that can cover the earth like the ocean.
Right. It's the evidence is hidden in plain sight. Epidemics.
Yes.
And look.
But that's the whole thing about astrology, and that's why the astrologers who are telling you this stuff, what is wrong with them? Because if there's one thing I've learned from astrology is that astrology, the meanings are a bell curve. And to take any part of the bell curve out, you're not looking at the whole thing, because it's very possible to look at someone with, let's say, Sun conjunct Neptune in their chart, and 1 minute they're the Pope, and the next minute they're the biggest lying son of a bitch you ever met in your life, because they want the world to be a certain way, and they're willing to work for it, just the Sun conjunct Neptune. And if you are operating your chart at a lower level, you're willing to lie. With Sun conjunct Neptune, either you're someone like Tony Robbins who inspires, or a priest, or you're someone who's willing to deceive people because it's gases, veils, the Wizard of Oz. So for them to say this to you is actually they're uncloaking and revealing the fact that they don't understand astrology, in my humble opinion.
Right, and I would totally agree with that. I would also say the issue is the trigger of this greater crisis, right? So the trigger might be the coronavirus itself, right? The epidemic that has now become an intercontinental pandemic, and which rules pandemics, and you can look this up in the Astrological Dictionary, is Pluto. So look at Pluto in this chart and look where it's at. It's
Oh yeah.
right. So you see Pluto here, and you see this sort of so with the Pluto there, it gives a certain level of intensity and explosive quality, sort of like a relentless evolutionary force bearing down onto the collective, right?
And Mars and Pluto were together. I've been expecting some kind of war, kind of. So I've been expecting it for days. Of course, once again, the bell curve. There is a war going on against the virus. There's the war going on to keep the world's economy and the derivative market and the Bank of International Settlements. They're trying to keep everything above floor. You know, there's a lot of wars going on.
Right. And
So,
also there's the brewing Cold War, which is going to become hotter and hotter as more revelations come out about the origin of this virus, how it got out, how the Chinese covered up, and how now the Chinese are reframing how it's America is at fault for the virus. And they have threatened that if we're not forthcoming with them, that they will cut off our entire medical supply and completely cut down our supply chain. Right.
well,
So they've already made these threats.
No, they have. And their approach is that in October of 2019, there was a World Military Olympics. And so they had 300 soldiers plus support staff in China, and I think in Wuhan, actually. And that's what they're trying to say, that's when apparently they think the Americans infected themselves, which is insanity. So that's what, this is not reported, because they keep saying the American soldiers did it, and everyone must look at them like, how did that happen? But that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the 300 participants in the military Olympics, which I think is just, they're clutching at straws personally.
Right.
But the whole thing about wars going on, now it's a war of words, and you're saying, yes, it could easily go from a Cold War to a hot war.
Right. So this is where, you know, we're just seeing, and look, the fact of the matter is that the real canary in the coal mine is this quadruple alignment,
Yes.
A lot of astrologers are overlooking that. They think, oh, well, you know, Mars is...
Don't tell me that. That drives me nuts. Are you serious?
I can't make this up. You know? So
I'm sorry, but I cannot believe that anyone who knows astrology for more than 6 months wouldn't. Even my cat is meowing about this. Zane, Zane, you're right. That
right.
is, I mean, in Brooklyn, we used to say, you're so full of shit, your eyes are brown. You know, I mean, that is so wrong. It just could not be more wrong.
Right. So, you know, the hardened philosophical belief that the ends justify the means are going to act as civilization destroyers if this crisis continues to accelerate and intensify, right? That's going to create a potential, which is already creating an existential crisis for humanity. So I really see this as a long emergency. We're not going to get out of this quickly, folks. I know what Trump said today. I almost wanted to scream at him and say,
he's talking about Easter.
Yeah, that's
resurrection.
That ain't happening. That is not happening.
Well, and once again, character is destiny. He's going to try and force it to happen in some way.
If he if he lifts any of the restrictions, let's say, Monte, you're president and you're being forced, your arms are being forced by the stern warnings by all the derivative traders that if you don't get this economy going, we're going to have to set off the credit default swaps, all right, and make margin calls on all the derivatives that will take down the global economy within seconds.
And he knows stuff like that.
He knows stuff, and he's getting those phone calls, so he's like, I've got to do something. Yet at the same time, he's between a rock and a hard place, because if he lifts any one of those restrictions, any one of them, he'll accelerate the infection, and which will put us back a month or two from where we're at now. And we haven't even contained it yet. So he's between a rock and a hard place. He can't lift it. And if he does,
he's also listening
folks, watch out.
He's listening to people who are telling him that with a lot of people quarantined and staying home, and this is actually unfortunately true, there's been a tremendous increase in domestic violence. I've had the police on my street, and we live in a nice neighborhood, twice, and I haven't seen them taking anybody away. There's been domestic violence. There's been a tremendous increase in violence against children. And at a certain point, his argument is going to be that the number of people that are going to die from the isolation and not having a job is less than the people that would die if they got sick. They're already starting to say stuff like that. Governor Cuomo in New York today was saying, you know, he was sort of agreeing with him that you can't make the. I'm not saying I come down on anybody's side. I'm just saying this is what they're saying, and this is going to be their rationale.
Right. Now, let me tell you why I know as an astrologer that policy, that type of thinking, if it's implemented into policy and they start going back to business as normal and lifting all the restrictions and everyone starts going to work, it will backfire because we are in the zone of the eclipse. Now, a lot of astrologers out there look at the day. Okay, it's the day of the eclipse and nothing happened to me and I'm good to go. No, it doesn't work like that. Eclipses always have their most profound impact 90 days prior to the eclipse, because eclipses are warning signals. They're signaling there's a red alert. They're warning signals that give an indication that there are unknown factors in the offing or state of affairs that will unexpectedly erupt, causing both dramatic and unanticipated developments well after the eclipse event itself. And that's what we're going into. And this is not a time to change policy, to change decisions, because the probability assessment is inconsistent or faulty leading up to the eclipse.
Well, I think that if he does pull it off on the 13th or whatever he's talking about for Easter, it's going to only amplify the correctness of your kaboom prediction.
Absolutely. And as soon as we see the pandemic go from linear to exponential growth because of reinfection occurring now.
Yeah.
If that decision should really happen, and I'm not so sure. With Trump, he's a Gemini, so he could say something and then on a dime reverse his decision.
100%.
Right?
He's a Leo rising like me, except instead of having Pluto on his ascendant, he has Mars.
Right.
So he thrives on people attacking him.
Right. He does. So look. But should that happen, he could lose the presidency just on that.
He knows.
I think he's more likely to lose the presidency should we lose control, if we can't maintain or if he can't bring this virus into containment. All right. And that's a loose word here. But if he cannot start reducing those numbers very soon, he could lose the election, more so on that than on the economy, because there's a lot of people out there know that he's not 100% responsible for what is happening with the global economy. This is much bigger than him.
Of course.
Right? And people who understand this, so that is the bigger issue. He needs to not listen to these derivative traders, these banksters, these Wall Street know-it-alls, and just say, we're going to make sure that we prioritize the safety of the population first and do everything that we need to do to bring down, to contain the pandemic, which is now the epicenter, right? The United States is the epicenter of this pandemic. It's no longer China. It's no longer Italy. It is now America, particularly in New York, New Jersey, and it's spreading. And that is the epicenter. New York, New Jersey area, that greater 50-mile radius area generates, folks, 28 to 30% of the economy. California is the other 30%, and all the other states is somewhere in between.
Right.
And that means
saying about the financialization of the economy, that it's centered in New York City.
That's right. The entire financialization, globalization, deployment, the will be completely destroyed and undermined if this virus continues. Look, Wall Street can't operate. They're talking about shutting down the markets.
Right.
I mean,
it's sort of like a decapitation strike, what's going on now, which is in military terms, and believe it or not, I was never in the military except the Civil Air Patrol, but I think a lot in military terms. And a decapitation strike is a strike that takes out the leadership, which is why they close the airspace over when the president does his State of the Union address, because everybody's in one spot.
Right.
So,
I mean, look
this,
at
this epicenter is like a decapitation strike. It's forced all these people, but they can work from home for a while. That's the
right.
other.
Right. Well, decapitation strike would be the perfect symbolism for that, for the decapitation strike of the most powerful country in the most powerful city, right, on the planet, the most populous, most powerful. You know for a fact that when people in New York make phone calls to Washington, make something happen or stop something, it has an impact more so than what China says, what Russia says.
Sure.
They're all secondary, tertiary players.
Right.
Those people in New York with certain zip codes, folks, and I happen to live in one of those zip codes, right? I think you have a condo in one of those areas, if I'm correct.
But no, the Hamptons is, believe me, is definitely one of those areas.
Right, one of those areas as well, folks. I'm telling you, they are the steel hand behind the glove, right? That basically control. They're essentially the actual military complex, right? The people that run the financial live in those areas, and now they're under threat.
They are under threat, but I think he's going to do it. I mean, William, I hate to say this, but from looking at it, I think he is going to try and do something by the 13th.
Okay, so I'm not so sure. That's me. All right. Now I'm not so sure, but I wanted to get back to military decapitation. So if you wanted to do a military decapitation strike on the world's third and largest superpower in the most powerful and richest city with the largest exchange market, with the largest political and financial class in the world that runs the show. I know some people out there, oh, America doesn't run the show for the rest of the world. Hate to tell you, it does. All right. It does. That's where you do it. You make sure you take that out with this Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, and you take them all out.
Yeah. So you're saying it could be done with the disease.
Correct.
Well, especially since, unless people have just inherited the money, most of the people with the super rich who can dial the president's phone number, most of those people are either boomers or older. So you're saying that this disease, as a bioweapon, could be designed to not only be a boomer remover, but a powerful boomer remover.
Correct. A complete destruction of the American oligarchical, financial, political elite class.
So if everybody hunkers down and doesn't go out and we flatten the curve, then those people stay in power.
Right. So it's a catch-22 as well. But I'm not so convinced that, okay, so if they do, we all hunker down and lower the curve and contain it until we do have an antidote and an inoculation program. Let's say we do that, we run the risk of a global meltdown that will be much greater than anything we have seen in history, which would take out the power, the wealth of the financial political class.
Well, but how do you see the Bank of International Settlements dealing with the derivative market? Because, I mean, if
they can't.
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, what are we talking about? 29 trillion or is that's peanuts?
No, we're talking 2 quadrillion of derivatives now. Oh, 2 quadrillion. Should one bank go? Monty, it's just one bank. Like Deutsche Bank. If they go, they all go. And they all go in hours.
And if that happens, then you're talking about something that makes the Bear Stearns thing look like Lehman Brothers look like nothing.
Just so you know, Deutsche Bank is 5 times bigger than Lehman, and it is listed by the Bank of International Settlements as the most systemically dangerous bank in the world. Its stock is now at $5. $5.
Really? But
yes.
So what can we tell people as astrologers and remote viewers and people who can see the future a little bit? What should they do? Besides, what they used to joke about, bend down, kiss your ass goodbye. We used to have the duck and the duck and cover when they thought that the Russians were going to be flying overhead with bombers.
Right. During the Cold War in the 50s and early 60s.
That's when I was a kid. I was born. For those of you who want to do my chart, it's January 22nd, 1950, 6:33 p.m., Brooklyn, New York. But back in the 50s, we had duck and cover, which was basically, kiss your butt, goodbye. So what can we tell people to do. I mean, they should, you were saying the other day, avoid money market funds, as I recall.
Absolutely. I would get as much cash out of the bank as you can. It's going to be very difficult because capital controls are already being in place. I have many people
Really?
throughout Europe and the United States, different parts, different banks, different regions, all saying, William, I want to take out 5,000. They would only let me take out 2. They told me to come back tomorrow. Then they said, we can't allow you, we can only get that 5,000 within a week. We don't have it. It's already starting. These are people that are just sending stuff to me that never came to me for a reading, just popping in with Facebook Messenger. My Facebook Messenger is just so full. It's going to take me like half a day to go through and answer or just say, acknowledge, thank you for the birthday wishes, blah, blah. It's massive.
Birthday.
Well, it's that. And then there's like, William, you're totally right. What do? I could only get 5,000 out and I have 90,000 in and I don't know anything about gold. I should have listened to you. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I don't want to say it's too late, but it's almost too late.
The places that sell gold are so backed up. The places that have it are running like 3 times as long in terms of shipping. At least this is what I'm hearing from people.
It's actually worse than that. It's worse than that. Now they're saying you can't even get it. You can't even get it. That is the problem.
Oh, that is maybe that. Yes. Well, yeah. Well, and people are saying, oh yeah, and the price of gold went down and silver went down and Bitcoin went down. That's a temporary dip because people are liquidating to have money to just sit around with and to feel like but if the kaboom that you're talking about happens, there'll be a reevaluation of what monetary system is used around the world.
Right. There's just on Zero Hedge, there was the highlighted article is, it's like selling toilet paper. If you haven't bought physical gold yet, it's probably too late. And here's the quote. Basically, we're selling as soon as we get stock on location in secure vaults, but we're restricted to what we can get hold of. It's a bit like toilet roll. Now, these are people who buy who are in these are people who have money, have abandoned their ETFs, have completely abandoned all of the the gold ETFs such as the GDX, and they want to have possession now of the metal.
Yeah.
And these are people with a lot of money. These are not like, William, I want to take my 90,000 out and buy gold. No, this is people with a lot more money than 90,000.
90,000 is a lot of money.
Well, no. I'm talking about people who have like 2 million in cash.
I read for a couple of billionaires.
No, I know. You read for very successful people. Yeah, no, I know that. I know. I'm just saying that this is what's happening now, and they can't get it. They can't get it. People who say, listen, money's not an issue. I'll even spend twice. In other words, if the price of gold, if the spot price is 1,600, they're willing to pay a premium. They call it a physical premium.
Well, you have to, yeah.
Of 2,000 plus, and they're saying, I'll give you 2,000. I'll give you 3,000 per ounce. I don't care. I want the gold. And they're like, thank you very much, but we can't deliver that because we don't have our inventory is running out.
Yeah, they can't sell stuff they don't have. Well, you did a prediction post on Facebook where you said 10,000 Dow, 10,000 Bitcoin, gold. 10,000 gold. Right. Yeah, you're right. 10, yeah, gold 10, was 10. The second one.
Right.
And when I read that, I thought, he's right. But there's a chance of that. But I still think there must be some. I mean, people should definitely be prepared. General Clausewitz. I say this a lot on my Facebook page. People are probably sick of it. But General von Clausewitz was this Prussian general, and he wrote the book called On War, I think. And his first rule of warfare was make your base secure. And anything you can do to make your base secure, food, toilet paper, whatever, I think those are the things people should be doing. And in a way, the pandemic gets you into that head. So that's kind of good. Am I a boomer who poops unicorns or what? That was
well, I actually worked in Unicorn Valley, Silicon Valley, which is, they should just rename it Unicorn Valley because the majority of the companies, over 500 of them, are unicorn companies, meaning they haven't made a profit in over 10 years, right? They get all of their capital financing by venture capital in New York City that injects a lot of money every quarter